Now, you wrote a very consequential book with your colleague, Professor Stephen Wald, in 2006 entitled Israel Lobby, which sought to document, for me, it was a real piece of not just scholarship, but journalism, to document the power of this lobby inside the United States, the reason why we always defend Israel, why we feed Israel more money than any other country. There have been a couple of times in the past where Presidents Reagan and Bush 41 wanted to confront Israel and had some acts of resistance, but they were met with a lot of accusations of anti-Semitism and other things. And since then, no one's really done it. And your book sought to explain why. Why is the United States so afraid to confront Israel? It seems to me that in addition to the Israel lobby, as you described it in your book, we now have a growing sector of the Republican Party who will acknowledge very explicitly that the reason they regard as vital and paramount to support and defend Israel is because their religious ideology, their theology, compels them to see Israel as a blessed nation by God, as a nation that sort of stands above all others, that they have a moral obligation to defend Israel. How important was that in 2006, that motivation, and how important is it now when you look at just how much time Congress spends holding hearings on Israel and talking about Israel and enacting policies to Israel, going to Israel, speaking to the Israeli Knesset? How do you see that motive in Washington?
Well, there's really two things that have happened here, Glenn. One is that Israel's behavior has become more outrageous with the passage of time. And that means that the lobby has to work harder and harder each year to defend Israel. They push politicians harder each year. And the end result is that politicians have to dance to the lobby's tunes today in ways they didn't when we wrote the book. I think that the lobby is more powerful today than it was when we wrote the book. Of course, we wrote the article in 2006 and the book in 2007. But that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that the Republicans understand that the Democratic Party is basically split on Israel. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party, broadly defined, is quite hostile to Israel at this point in time and thinks Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And the Republicans see this as an opportunity to get full support from the lobby and to turn the lobby against the Democratic Party. So almost every Republican in the land is going to great lengths trying to kiss up to the lobby. And Joe Biden is really in a very difficult position as a result of this, because he's deeply fearful that he will alienate the lobby if he plays hardball with Israel. But at the same time, he understands if he doesn't do something to show that he can get semi-tough with the Israelis, he doesn't have to do much, but just a little bit, he can then win over the progressives who are abandoning him in droves. But the fact is, he's caught between a rock and a hard place, and there's not much he can do to win. And the Republicans fully understand this, and for that reason, the Republicans have embraced the lobby in ways that we have not seen in the past.
It is really amazing all over the democratic world, all over the world entirely, people are increasingly opposed to the Israeli war in Gaza. They are increasingly horrified by the things they're seeing there. They want this war over. They've been cutting diplomatic ties with Israel, recognizing the Palestinian state. And yet here in the United States, we're about to have a presidential campaign and a presidential debate where the two primary candidates are just going to be arguing with one another about who is more pro-Israel. There'll be no debate at all about this incredibly consequential and polarizing and costly policy. They'll both be fighting with one another over who can be more pro-Israel. And I guess that, in a sense, has been what American politics has been for the last several decades. And I do want to just push a little bit, or not push, but just kind of re-ask the question about, obviously there's a finance pro-Israel lobby. There are American Jews who feel a connection to Israel the way lots of minority groups feel a connection to the country of their origin, whether it's the place they come from when they immigrate, or Italy, or Ireland, whatever. People have these kinds of connections. But you do now have an extremely vocal, and I think increasing, factor in the Republican Party primarily that has caused this defense of Israel to become even more fortified and almost absolute, which is this evangelical and theological motivation. Do you think that that is a significant or non-trivial factor now in why there's so much congressional support for Israel?
It's non-trivial for sure, but I don't think it's the key. I think that most of the people who feel that way are Christian Zionists, and I think the Christian Zionists are an important part of the Israel lobby, as Steve and I articulated in our book. But I think that it's American Jews who are deeply committed to Israel and want the United States to support Israel unconditionally, who are really driving the train. And a lot of this has to do with campaign contributions. There's just no getting around that. You notice that the other day, Donald Trump visited a group of rich donors, many of whom were Jewish, and he told them that he would basically deport the protesters. He'd arrest them and deport them. That's how he'd deal with all the unrest on campuses. I mean, this is hard to believe that he said that in a serious way, but he did. And the question you want to ask yourself is, why did he say that? And the point is, he wanted campaign contributions, and that's why he was meeting with these rich donors. So that is an important part of the story for sure.
And just to underscore the point, within, I think, 48 hours, it was announced that Sheldon Adelson's widow, Sheldon Adelson was a multi-billionaire who said his big issue was Israel, who refunded the Republican Party to keep it very pro-Israel. She announced, or someone announced on her behalf, that they were going to create a pro-Trump PAC and that she would finance it on a level never previously seen in presidential politics. So the Adelsons, whose primary issue by far is Israel, obviously was responding to those statements by Trump, where he said what you said, as well as, I will be the most pro-Israel politician in our history.
But you want to remember, Glenn, as I said before, and you have been saying in the conversation here, Israel is in real trouble. And these donors and these staunch supporters of Israel, these people in the lobby, these institutions in the lobby, they all understand that Israel is in deep trouble. So they're willing to find politicians who will support Israel hook, line, and sinker and give them all the support that they need to win. And that's what's going on here. And the Republicans, again, understand that the Democrats are in trouble on this issue from a political point of view, because you have a huge number of Democrats who believe that Israel is committing genocide. A huge number of Democrats believe that Israel is committing genocide and that the United States should move to cause a ceasefire right away. And these rich donors do not want to hear that. So they're willing to support people like Trump or make it clear to Biden that he better change his tune, or else they'll go to great lengths to defeat him in the fall.
When you say Israel is in deep trouble, that these pro-Israel donors and activists understand that, what do you mean by Israel is in deep trouble? Is it that they're involved in a war for which they have no ultimate outcome or plan? Is it that they're more isolated than ever on the world stage and the international community? Or is it something else? What kind of deep trouble do you consider them to be in?
Well, I'd make two arguments. One is Israel is an apartheid state. Right? As Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and B'Tselem, which is the leading human rights organization in Israel, have made clear, all three of those human rights organizations have made clear in extensive reports that Israel is an apartheid state.
And excuse me for interrupting there just quickly. So have many top Israeli officials, including the former head of the Mossad chosen by Bibi Netanyahu in 2015, who the month prior to October 7th published an article in The Guardian saying Israel is now either very close to, on the brink of, or has become an apartheid state.
Yes, but that's very important, Glenn, because that's just evidence that leaders in Israel understand this phenomenon, right? They understand that Israel is an apartheid state. And we all know what happened to South Africa. And the question you have to ask yourself is whether or not you think this is sustainable over the long term. And the answer is no. And I think that Israeli leaders are looking for a way out. To go back to what I was saying about ethnic cleansing before, I believe that one of the principal reasons that the Israelis favor ethnic cleansing is because it solves the apartheid problem. If you drive the Palestinians out of Gaza and then you drive the Palestinians out of the West Bank, you have a clear majority of Israeli Jews running Greater Israel, and you don't have an apartheid state. The problem you have now, Glenn, is that there are about 7.3 million Palestinians and 7.3 million Israeli Jews. And the Israeli Jews dominate the Palestinians. They oppress the Palestinians. That's why it's an apartheid state. And that is a huge problem for Israel moving forward. But that's only one dimension of the trouble that they faced. The other dimension that the other problem that they face is they're involved in a war where they are being accused of genocide and where lots of people believe they're committing genocide. This is a huge problem. And the problem, in very important ways, is not going to go away. Why is that the case? You remember that in 2005, Ariel Sharon, who was no shrinking violet, pulled Israeli settlers and the Israeli military out of Gaza. And he turned Gaza into a giant open-air prison. And why did he do that? Because he knew the place was a hornet's nest, and the last thing he wanted to do was stay in that hornet's nest. He wanted to get out, which he did. Well, if you look at what's happened, the Israelis are back in the hornet's nest. And is there any way of getting out? I don't see it. If they don't successfully ethnically cleanse Gaza, and let's certainly hope that they don't, that means the Israelis are going to have to run the place. They're going to be in the place for the foreseeable future. This is a disaster for them. The public relations dimension of that alone is going to be a disaster. This problem is not going to go away. There'll be more protests on campuses in the fall. And for as far as the eye can see, as long as the Israelis are in Gaza doing terrible things to the Palestinians. Can you tell me how they're going to get out of there anytime soon? I don't think so. That means they're in deep trouble. When you marry that to the apartheid problem, Israel's future does not look rosy.
Yeah, and just on that Palestinian point, the South Africa point and the concern about being labeled an apartheid state because it brought down the minority rule government of South Africa, in part that really did happen because of this activist movement, which found expression in large part on campuses in the West and in the United States, demanding the divestment and sanctioning and boycotting of South Africa. And you've seen, and I think a lot of people didn't realize it at the time, a lot of pro-Israel journalists and activists and politicians have been very, very focused on American colleges for a long time. They've been talking about what's going on there. They've made it a priority. They were celebrated when they forced out the presidents of Harvard and Penn for insufficiently cracking down on anti-Israel speech. They've enacted all kinds of laws banning supporters of the boycott movement of Israel. This has been something that they've been concerned about for a very long time. And ironically, the effort to crack down over all these many years is now spawning the opposite outcome that they wanted, where you have these college students who, a lot of them never even thought about Israel before. This is the first time they're getting a look at the reality of Israel and its relationship to the United States. And it seems very, very difficult to imagine how this is going to get reversed, especially if Israel is going to continue this war at least through the end of this year.
Let me make 2 points just to back up what you're saying. First of all, when I was young, and I think this is probably true when you were young too, the mainstream media basically controlled the discourse about Israel. And the lobby and Israel's supporters had huge influence on how Israel was portrayed in the mainstream media. We now have an alternative media where people speak in an honest way about what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. you're a manifestation of this phenomenon. And there are lots of other outlets that people can go to where they can get a sense of what really has happened over time in Greater Israel and what's happening today. And this causes huge problems for Israel. And this problem wasn't present in the past. The second thing you don't want to lose sight of is, again, when I was young, and it was probably true when you were young, if you came to a university like the University of Chicago or Georgetown University, most of the students were white, right? There were a smattering of black students for sure, but it was a very white campus. There hadn't been a lot of immigration. And furthermore, there were not that many international students on campus. What's happened over time is, as a result of immigration, the United States has become a much more heterogeneous society. And you have all sorts of people who come from countries where there's no real sympathy for Israel. And you also have lots of international students. And very importantly, you have lots of students from the Arab and Islamic world who come, who get educated, and who write books of their own, who become professors, who become the heads of Middle East centers at universities, right? So they are in a position to tell a story, right, that, excuse me, Glenn, that contradicts the basic Israeli story about the creation of Israel and what's going on today. And that message that those people are sending out gets picked up by people like you. And people like me don't have to worry about being called by NPR or the New York Times, who have no interest in talking to me, because I know that people like you will call me up and we can come on this show, we can talk about these things, and millions of people can listen to us discuss the issue in a rational, legal way. This is a huge problem for the lobby. And by the way, one final point, this is why the lobby is going after TikTok.
Exactly. I just wanted to, and it is interesting because, you know, I've known you for a long time. We've been talking for a long time, but I have absolutely noticed that in the past 2 years, because of Ukraine and now Israel, that you have a massive online following. When you go and appear on these shows, a lot of people are very interested in what you're saying. And just that alone didn't exist even 10 or 15 years ago, aside from the fact that people can now watch what is happening in Gaza because it's no longer centralized in the hands of a few tiny corporations who show you only what they want you to see or the government wants you to see. And I think the point about TikTok is so important because, and we cover this a lot on our show, the proposed ban on TikTok has been lingering in Washington for years and it couldn't get passed. It was based on the argument that it gives China too much influence to our youth. And the reason why it suddenly got passed very quickly over in a bipartisan way within a couple of months after October 7th, and the sponsors of the bill and the people who voted yes will tell you this, is because they became convinced that the reason so many young people have turned against Israel is because TikTok allows too much information to circulate about the realities of what's going on in Gaza. It allows too much information to circulate that makes people anti-Israel, and they went and they banned it, like an incredible act of censorship, to ban an app that a third of the American population voluntarily chooses to use. And I just want to make one other point about the campus issue as well, in addition to all the ones that you made, which is I also think that an extremely damaging trend for Israel in this regard is that there is a clear generational shift among younger Jews, 40 and younger, 30 and younger, that not only don't feel a very strong connection to Israel, but have become very alienated by it, especially by its right-wing tilt, by the kind of extremism, the lack of plurality. And at a lot of these protests, as you all know, there also are a lot of Jews, a lot of anti-Israel Jews and pro-Palestinian Jews who have become part of this movement as well. And it makes it, as you said, much more difficult to demonize these movements and demonize people who are critical of Israel as anti-Semites. You know, I remember back in 2007, you and Professor Wald were, you know, they really set out to destroy your career. And all of media was calling you anti-Semitic in your book, Anti-Semitic. And that's why I think a free internet is so crucial, because you now have a counter to that that is by no means small and trivial. There are millions of people who get their knowledge and their news from independent media that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. And I think that has changed the dynamic so much.
Glenn, I want to make 2 points. One is when Steve and I wrote the article and the book, virtually all of our defenders were Jewish. Virtually all of our defenders,
Including
were
me
Jewish.
at the
Just
time.
including you. That's correct, right? Second point I want to make is I think that as a result of the fact that the lobby defends Israel successfully at almost every turn, has led the Israelis to become careless. And as a result of this, they've gotten themselves into a heap of a lot of trouble when you factor in the internet. Now, what exactly am I saying there? First of all, with regard to the leaders, you remember in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, the Israeli leaders said some absolutely horrible things about the Palestinians and what they planned to do to the Palestinians. They were calling them animals. They were talking about killing all of them and so forth and so
Starving
on.
them, starving them.
Starving them, exactly. And it was, these were not low-level officials. This was the top tier of leaders in the Israeli government. The things they were saying, it's just hard to believe that anyone would say those things publicly, maybe privately, but publicly. And I remember there was a piece in Haaretz that was talking about the ICJ deliberations in The Hague, and the Haaretz headline said, "The road to The Hague is paved with comments by Israeli leaders," because they were showing genocidal intent. So that's one dimension. The second dimension is Israeli soldiers have been taking videos of themselves doing horrible things to the Palestinians and ransacking Palestinian houses and so forth and so on, and then posting those videos on the internet. And of course, they're ricocheting all over the world. And you say to yourself, why would you do this? You know, I think it's absolutely horrible that they would even do these things to begin with, but to film yourself doing these horrible things and then post them somewhere on the internet is a prescription for really serious trouble. So the Israelis are documenting their own gross misbehavior and making it possible for people to see what they're doing. And unsurprisingly, given that we have all these outlets, these alternative media outlets like your show, it's no surprise that Israel is in really deep trouble. And this, again, is why the lobby is working overtime these days.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.